The great business schools in America have case studies on the innovators and inspiring entrepreneurs that have changed the way business is done. Andrew Rube Foster would be a perfect person to study. He was the godfather of black baseball. His innovations as a pitcher, manager, and visionary executive are legendary. Born in 1879 to former slaves in Texas, Foster demonstrated athletic talent and financial acumen that have not been seen from one individual in baseball since his passing in 1930.
Calvert, Texas is where he was born, lived and died in Chicago. Great pitcher in the early era of black baseball. He checks all three boxes. He would have gone in the Hall of Fame as a player, as a manager, and as an executive. And you don't find very many, if any, that check all three boxes, and that's how profound Andrew Rube Foster was to this game. He should be a household name, but he's not.
And we're talking right the state of Texas. A lot of people don't know because mainly he pitched up north.
Yes. He is credited with having invented what we now know to be the screwball.
Okay.
Back then it was called a fadeaway. And Rube perfected this pitch. So much so that the great Major League manager John McGraw would sneak Rube into his camp so that Rube could teach Christy Mathewson how to throw the screwball.
Okay, we're talking about Christy Mathewson. When people talk about the greatest pitchers of all time, okay, yes, his name comes to mind.
Yes,
and you're saying Rube said, hey, add this to your game.
Yeah, well, McGraw had seen how masterful Rube was with this pitch. And I think he said, hey, I need my guy to learn this pitch. And he snuck him into his camp. Now, this is black and white intermingling at a time when it wasn't one of those things that we did.
Against the law in certain places.
In certain places, absolutely. And he brings Rube into his camp so that Rube could teach Christy how to throw that pitch. Christy he literally mastered that pitch, and he threw it all the way into the National Baseball Hall of Fame with a pitch that he learned from Rube Foster, although Foster was never really given the credit that he deserves for teaching him that pitch.
And that's just as a player. He won world championships as a player.
I mean, it was dominant as a player, a world championship caliber player, and then was masterful as a manager. So much so that Rube, at the turn of the 1900s,
okay,
was known to fine his ball players as much as $5 if you were tagged out standing up. No, you were supposed to slide. Rube would draw a circle down the first base line and a circle down the third base line. And if every one of his players couldn't drop a bunt inside the circle, he would fine them. He was adamant about the style of play that would become signature in Negro Leagues baseball. Fast, aggressive, daring. And honestly, that was the style of play that drew both black and white fans who would eventually sit side by side during an era when doing something socially together was virtually unheard of. Rube Foster's brand of baseball brought both races together. And he was just so masterful. And then, of course, as an executive, he accomplished what others had attempted to do but had failed, to create a successful, organized black baseball structure, mirrored after Major League Baseball. What Rube also understood was that for his newly formed Negro National League, established in Kansas City, as a matter of fact, right around the corner from where the museum currently operates, the old Paseo YMCA, that building still stands, and we've designated it as the home of the future Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center. So we're actually saving that old historic landmark where Rube Foster led that group of 8 independent black baseball team owners into a meeting at that YMCA, and on February 13, 1920, they started the Negro Leagues, the first successful organized black baseball league. And this does not happen without the genius of Rube Foster. That's why I say, in my own estimation, he is the most brilliant baseball mind this sport has ever seen, and nobody knows who the heck he is, even though he is rightfully enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. He ran the Negro Leagues like a tyrant. He really did. And we've been very fortunate. We acquired the financial journal that belonged to Rube Foster. So for those who believe that this was some kind of fly-by-night league, that it wasn't organized, you're wrong. This financial journal that belonged to Rube Foster documents every single business transaction that took place in the Negro Leagues from 1920 through 1925 and up until the time that he gets sick and he can no longer operate as president of the Negro Leagues. For me, it is one of the holy grails of Negro Leagues memorabilia. I think the old Paseo YMCA, where the leagues were formed, is perhaps the most significant Negro Leagues artifact in existence. It's the very building that it all was organized in. And we're thrilled to be saving that. But this financial journal is certainly a close number 2 or 1B. It also shows that Rube Foster was making 5% of the annual gate. Yeah, 5%. Now, I'm from Crawfordville, Georgia. I am not that great at math, but the numbers that the Negro Leagues were doing between 1920 and 25, and you getting 5% of that, you're doing okay.
Well, add in the fact, the Negro Leagues was the third
largest
black-owned business.
Yeah.
During that time. It was insurance.
Exactly.
Madam C.J. Walker with the hair care products.
Yes.
And
black baseball.
Black baseball.
It did have an even greater impact in terms of spawning success of other black businesses.
So, at this point in time, when we're talking about Rube Foster in
Yes.
1920, okay, when don't even think about the National Football League. It just started. So professional football wasn't something we're talking. Your 3 biggest sports in America. We're talking baseball, horse racing, boxing.
That's it.
Blacks could not play in the majors. They had been banned at this point in time. So here it is, the most popular sport. And Rube Foster figured out, hey, I can make money. We can make money because we have to entertain ourselves.
He brought together 7 other independent black baseball team owners.
Okay.
So those owners were making money. He had to sell them on the notion of organization, that we need to come together as one, and that this is going to be better for the long-term success of black baseball. He was a master salesman. And interestingly enough, it was the black press that was pushing this agenda. So the black press had been pushing for an organized structure so that black baseball would mirror Major League Baseball. And Rube, again, had the juice. And somehow or another, when they met there in Kansas City, he convinced those other owners that this is the way to go. They would have then established the Negro National League, the first successful organized black baseball league. Rube Foster, in his own, I guess, state of triumph, stood there at the Paseo YMCA, and he uttered this prophetic statement. He said, "We are the ship, all else the sea." And he was sending notice to Major League Baseball that a new player had arrived on the scene to be reckoned with. And he was absolutely right. And again, to give you an indication of how forward-thinking Rube was, Rube Foster thought that he could create a league that was so dynamic that he would force Major League Baseball's hand to expand and absorb teams from the Negro Leagues. And he was almost right. Instead, Major League Baseball focused on the field and plucked that talent away from the Negro Leagues, siphoned all of that talent out which ultimately signaled the demise of the Negro Leagues. But see, that's how visionary Rube was, because under his model, we'd have had complete integration well before Jackie breaks the color barrier. Every role that is being fulfilled in the game would have been filled by black folks well before Jackie ever breaks the color barrier, if Rube had been right. And he was right. It just never actually transpired. But he was such a visionary.
And his life ended in a tragic way.
It does. It has all the makings of a Hollywood film. You know, and I tell people all the time, you don't have to make Negro Leagues, you don't have to make it up. It ain't got to be fictionalized to make it entertaining. Tell the real story. It's entertaining in its own right. And so, as I mentioned, Rube was likely one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful man in all of professional sports. Because again, no other owner had a deal like Rube Foster had, where he's getting 5% of the annual gate. No one had a deal like that. And so he did indeed run the Negro Leagues like a tyrant. He handled every aspect of black baseball business operations. He had his imprint over everything. So needless to say, there were some within the ranks of the Negro Leagues that thought he had too much control. And so the story has it that he's on league business in Indianapolis. And he is asleep in his hotel room and is exposed to a gas leak. Passerby comes by, smells the gas, kicks in, rescues him, but he's unconscious. When he comes to, he was never the same. Likely suffered brain damage, and it caused him to have fits of violent outrage, which ultimately forced his family to have to institutionalize him, where several years later, he dies of a heart attack. Now, when Rube dies, and this was just outside of Chicago where this insane asylum was, when he dies, the fans of Chicago line the streets for 3 consecutive days to pay their respect to their beloved Rube Foster. But you see, there's great belief that that gas leak wasn't accidental, that someone tried to take Rube out. So here is the most brilliant mind in baseball history who dies in an insane asylum. You can't make this stuff up. And that's why I think he is the most influential baseball figure of all time.